My first bicycle was a little Schwinn. It was Carolina blue, as we say in North Carolina. It had training wheels, and it had tassels coming off the handlebars, white and, of course, Carolina blue. But on one handlebar, there was this sort of special contraption, also Carolina blue, that you could attach to the handlebar, and you could sort of rev it, and it made a vroom, vroom noise. And to my 4-year-old self, this was like a motorcycle. Think baby dykes on bikes. So, my Schwinn and I were deeply bonded and deeply attached, and I had worked really hard to secure this prized possession for myself. See, my parents had decided that it was time for me to start sleeping in my own bed all through the night, most nights, all the time. So they had told me if I could do this, if I could stay in my own bed and leave them alone for a solid month, all night, every night, that I could get this bike that I really wanted. The thing was, I was really afraid of the dark, and a few attempts at this, a couple months, it still wasn't working. So they then decided that they would make a chart and put it on the inside of my bedroom door. This chart was very meticulous. It had all the days of the week and all the weeks of a whole month. If I could succeed at a certain time each night, I would get a little star. Enough stars means I get the bike. But then they added this other piece that I think really sort of cinched the deal. And that was this lovely watercolor picture of Jesus, being the good evangelicals that they are. It was, of course, a picture of Jesus, with a lamb draped around his neck, clearly having rescued this lamb from some sort of peril. So this was the little added piece to help me feel a little more safe. You guys, when I talk about this type of picture, how many of us maybe grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and are familiar with this kind of picture, this sort of pastoral watercolor, lovely scene with the surfer, blonde hair, blue-eyed Jesus, right? Looking quite American and middle class and very white. Well, it served the purpose of helping me get through the night and achieving the goal of my bike, but the reality is that this setting and this scene, as lovely as it is, was a very far cry from life in Jesus and Bible times. So life in Jesus and Bible times, as some of us know, slightly different than the watercolor pastel paintings. Life under Roman occupation was a brutal, daily, precarious existence. The ruler, also known as Caesar, was considered to be half man, half God, and was part of the rule that he had to be referred to also as the Son of God. So the Roman Caesar, Son of God, really was big on displaying his power as much as possible throughout the land. The most common form of this was crucifixion. It wasn't a special occasion, it was usually a daily event that happened, and there would be what we now call crosses scattered all over the land on the hillsides as reminders of this type of brutal force that folks were living under the threat of. So it's against this kind of backdrop that a lot of our New Testament Bible stories are set. And for the folks reading them or hearing them down the road, it was just assumed that they knew this to be the case, because indeed they did. And like now, story and art then played a really similar role. I mean, what does art do for us? Why do we have this service called Art and Soul? It helps us connect with something. It gives us voice for things that are really hard, right? It also gives us hope and joy. How can you listen to that beautiful song and not feel a sense of joy and a reminder of that? Well, art played a very similar role then as well. And kind of like the picture of Jesus helped me get through the night, they had their images as well. A really common image at this time that was throughout the Hebrew scriptures that people in sort of early Jesus movements would certainly know about was this image of an abundant feast. This image, usually up on a mountain somewhere, of this endless feast with amazing wine, really good quality wine, that didn't end, that never ran out. And at this feast were all types of people. So you can kind of get an image of this in your head, right? And this was sort of the image that folks would conjure up when they would think, gosh, what is it going to be like when the realm of God, when the way God really wants the earth and the world to be, when that happens, it's a big party, essentially, with endless supplies and endless wine. So this is a common image, a common theme they would know. It's a symbol of joy and prosperity, community, peace and love, everyone having enough of everything. It's all throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. So when we meet Jesus here in John, we need to understand a couple of cultural realities. One is the brutal daily existence of living under Roman occupation. And two is that people coped by their stories and images of hope, comfort, and promise. One other symbol I must tell you about is that of a wedding. It's no coincidence that the story is happening at a wedding. Again, throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, we have the symbol of a wedding being used all the time to portray and embody this idea of God's perfect covenant love with God's people. So, we have a wedding. We have a pretty regular guy who's proclaimed to be the Son of God, who's there with his mom and a bunch of people. Okay? It seems we also have an open bar that has run dry. It's a bummer. So Mary, Jesus' mother, doing what mothers do, finds her son and is like, hey, they've run out of wine. You can kind of see Jesus probably hanging out with friends. He had followers. Basically, his friends were there with him. Mary taps him on the shoulder. Woman, what do you want with me? It sounds kind of disrespectful to us, but it's actually a term of endearment. What is it that you want with me? Well, they're out of wine. He's like, well, my time hasn't come yet. And of course, Mary then, you can almost see her turning to the servants and says, just do whatever he tells you to do. So that's what happens, of course. Jesus goes, okay. All right. Tells the servants what to do. You already heard me read it. So Jesus, who had just said that his time hadn't yet come, actually had to learn that perhaps it had. So if you have ever been to a dinner party, you've probably noticed, again, like the story said, that the beginning of the evening is really when you want to pull out the good stuff, right? And sort of the bad stuff, and then lesser stuff, you're going to wait until everyone's had enough to drink and the palates are a little less discerning. Not too different then. So it was really this sign and symbol of major abundance when indeed what came out of these water jars was this really, really, really good wine. Also notice that the host of the party goes straight to the bridegroom, the groom, essentially, and says, hey, wow, this is amazing. You've done this thing that you have saved. You've hidden all this wine. Who knew? We have no picture here of the groom actually saying, hey, actually, I have no idea what you're talking about. We also have no picture of Jesus saying, excuse me. No, he didn't look for that kind of recognition. But it happened. And John tells us that this is the first sign of Jesus' mission. From here, John goes on in this gospel to list a bunch of signs that start to happen. And you're probably sitting there thinking, well, isn't that what the Gospels are? Like stories about how great Jesus is and all these miracles? Well, yes and no. The Gospel of John's a little bit different than Matthew and Mark and Luke. And here's one key difference, is that John uses a different word. He uses a Greek word that does translate as sign, whereas our other three Gospel authors use a word that really is more to mean miracle. So this is intentional. This isn't like a fluke or a difference of taste in a word. There's a deeper meaning here. So in John's gospel, there's this sense that these signs that are happening are pointing to something bigger than the sort of magical act that happened. That they're pointing to something way beyond that, way beyond the act, and beyond even Jesus himself. So for folks hearing or reading this story of the wedding at Cana, late in the 1st century, which is when the Gospel of John was written, like 90-ish, we think, they were getting that these were signs. They could read all of these signs together and they could see them accumulated at once and go, something was happening in the world at this time. Something was happening, and it was bigger than the moment. It was bigger than a person. It was even bigger than a community. They were recognizing that something had indeed shifted. A new thing. And a new thing is what they got, but they worked really, really hard for it. The early Jesus communities still continue to live under this really difficult time. But there were openings and there were signs, and they began to change things. So they birthed counter movements, secret supper clubs, subversive groups. And what made these groups so subversive and crazy and radical and scary is that everybody was welcome, which is really counter to the power and control at that time. Everyone was welcome at the table, and they did a lot of eating and drinking and talking and praying and trying to figure things out and supporting each other and loving each other. They tried to figure out what did it mean to maybe try to live a little bit like this guy Jesus had lived. Later, they would be called Christians, and eventually this thing would be called Christianity, but they saw themselves as the ecclesia, or the assembly, a bunch of assemblies. They were birthed out of a time when there were signs. They were birthed out of a time when there were openings. So here's the deal, is I believe, I really deeply believe that there are times in the world and in history where there are openings. Openings in a bigger way, openings in an energetic way, like for big shifts to happen. This would be one of them that we're reading about. And I must say that long before Oprah, the people of the Jesus Way were talking about shifts in consciousness. Do you see any signs? Any shifts? Do you feel any shifts right now? On election night this year, I was sitting in one of my seminary common rooms. I'm a Master's of Divinity student at Union Theological Seminary. And like all good seminarians, we were gathered around the table in couches watching the returns come in. And of course, it was, as we know, it was announced really early in the night that Obama had won again. And once we picked our jaw up off the floor that this had actually happened so quickly, and we began to not worry that it was a mistake, that it was real, well, then all this other news started coming in. Do you guys remember that night? All this other news started coming in. Tammy Baldwin was elected, right? Women made huge gains politically. Minorities, if we can still call minorities, were also making huge gains. And then marriage equality. It was an unprecedented night. I was sitting beside my friend Erica, and as the evening went on and more cake was eaten and a little bit more rum drunk, she looked at me and she said, "The white majority is dead." And we clinked our glasses and said, "Yeah." My friend Elizabeth was on the other side of me. She's from Washington State. And as the news came in that marriage equality was actually looking like it might happen in Washington State, she got a text from her mom that said, "Hey, you can come home now and get married." To me, these are signs. Do you see them? Do you see signs? I believe that in my lifetime, in many of our lifetimes, that gay couples are no longer going to have to collect marriage license in equal states like bingo chips, that a marriage in one state is actually going to be recognized anywhere in this country. I used to dream of this for my godchildren, but now I actually think it's very true and real in my friend's lifetime and in mine. With openings like this and with signs like this, it's an amazing opportunity, it's an amazing time, but it's also a great, great responsibility. Great responsibility. So, and what makes this a specific time of responsibility is that there's an opening, and in the opening means people have to step into it and people have to do something. So we're pretty big on that here at Middle, stepping into these times and into these openings and doing something. Hence, the March on Washington is going to be happening next week, and we're going to be going. Talking about race. It's great that there is once again an African American in the Oval Office, but let's not kid ourselves and think that that is the end of racism. We all know that it's a disease in this country. We all know that it's something that still can be really lethal and kill lots and lots of people, including ourselves. So we step into that and we do something about that too. And that's what we're trying to do here, is to step into those openings. But what are signs that you see? What are the openings for you? And if you don't know them off the top of your head, one way to maybe find out is to look in and say, where am I most deeply moved? What is my specific place? It could be economic reform. It could be eco-justice. It could be disparities in education, immigration reform. You know what it is. And also one more question. Are we ever a little bit like Jesus and think, it's not time for me yet. My time has not yet come. When actually, it has. He was a little reluctant to step into the space that was waiting for him, but the reality is that only he could step into that space. The same is true for every one of us. There's a space that only we can fill, and it's kind of like a thumbprint. It's only ours. So, I believe the signs are here. I believe you can see them and know what they are. There are openings. We can roll up our sleeves and step into those with every single part of our being. I think 3D glasses are really helpful too in finding those. You have, hopefully, in your bulletin, 3D glasses and some special funky paper. Does everybody have that? Okay, so the blue should be over the right eye. I want you to, if you would, put your glasses on, take out the piece of paper that you have, and there should be a pencil in the pew in front of you. And if not, let me know, and I'll get you a writing utensil. And I want you just to think for a couple minutes, just let an image come to you. This is your personal tablet. You can write a sign, draw a sign, or a vision. John's going to play a little music for us. And just take 2 minutes. Your sign, your vision. The Hebrew Scriptures tell us to write the vision and make it plain. So friends, we're going to have an offertory, but I want you to hang on to what you've drawn, and I want you to hang on to your glasses and take those things home, and I want you to put them somewhere where you can see them, that you'll be reminded to maybe even put the glasses on and look at what you drew, look at your vision, your signs.